The blazing sun scorches the land, but in ancient Egypt, step into a market and you will definitely find something unthinkable. Pure ice in the desert. How did they do it? From melting perfume cones on their scalps to crafting their own ice, here are 20 tricks the ancient Egyptians used to stay cool during scorching summers. Ice and snow storage from mountains. It might seem impossible to imagine ice in the heart of the Egyptian desert, but Egyptians were masters of adaptation. Despite the blistering heat, they found ways to import and store ice, allowing the elite to enjoy chilled drinks and cool themselves centuries before refrigeration was invented. Historians believe that Egyptians, alongside Persians and Mesopotamians, sourced blocks of ice from distant mountains, particularly the Lebanon Mountains and the Sinai Peninsula. These ice blocks were carefully wrapped in insulating materials such as straw, reeds and sawdust to slow down melting. Transporting them across vast distances was no small feat. Donkey caravans and boats along the Nile were used to deliver the ice to cities where it would be stored. Once in Egypt, the ice was placed in underground storage chambers, where thick stone walls, deep insulation, and shaded locations helped preserve it for longer periods. Wealthy Egyptians and high-ranking officials had access to this ice, often using it to cool their homes or create refreshing, chilled drinks, a luxury unimaginable to most ancient societies. The Persians later perfected this technique, developing yakhchals, massive ice houses that kept ice frozen year-round. But the Egyptians were among the first civilizations to transport and store ice, proving their innovative thinking in extreme conditions. In royal palaces and temple complexes, ice was even used for religious ceremonies and rituals, emphasizing its spiritual significance beyond just comfort. Evaporative cooling with clay pots. In ancient Egypt, where temperatures could soar well above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping the body and water cool was a constant struggle. Egyptians found their solution in porous clay pots, a technique so effective that it remained in use for thousands of years. These pots, known as zir pots, were crafted from unglazed clay that naturally allowed water to slowly seep through microscopic pores. As the water reached the surface, it evaporated, drawing heat away from the remaining liquid inside and cooling it significantly. For this method to work best, Egyptians placed these pots in breezy areas or shaded courtyards. Wind increased evaporation, making the water even cooler. Traders and farmers carried smaller versions of these pots during long journeys, ensuring they had access to refreshingly cool water in the middle of the desert. Even priests in temples relied on this technique. Water for sacred rituals had to be kept pure and fresh, so temple courtyards often had large stone basins lined with clay vessels, ensuring that water remained cool before ceremonies. Zir pots weren't just for drinking water. Large clay containers were used to store grains, oils, and even wine, helping prevent spoilage in Egypt's harsh climate. In wealthier households, these pots were often stored in stone-walled rooms or partially buried in the ground for extra insulation. This cooling trick wasn't limited to the wealthy. Everyone from common labourers to the royal court used it. In bustling cities like Thebes and Ramesses, markets had rows of clay water pots, allowing vendors to sell cool drinks to passers-by. Cooling oils and perfumed fat cones. The heat of the Egyptian sun wasn't just uncomfortable, it could be unbearable, especially for those who spent long hours outside. To combat this, Egyptians turned to cooling herbal oils made from lotus, frankincense, and myrrh. These oils weren't just for fragrance, they had natural cooling properties that helped the skin stay refreshed. Priests, nobles, and even workers would apply light layers of oil to their skin, which not only protected them from the drying effects of the sun, but also provided a cooling sensation as the oil slowly absorbed into the body. Some mixtures even contained menthol-like ingredients, giving them a refreshing effect similar to modern cooling balm. Beyond herbal oils, wealthier Egyptians had an even more luxurious cooling trick. They wore perfumed fat cones on their heads. These small cones, made from scented animal fat or beeswax infused with essential oils, were strategically placed atop wigs or shaved heads. Throughout the day, the heat would melt the cone gradually, releasing fragrant oils that trickled down and provided a cooling effect on the scalp. This method served a dual purpose: cooling the body as the melted oils absorbed into the skin and keeping the wearer smelling fresh, especially in the intense desert climate. Perfumed fat cones were primarily used by nobles, priests and elite women, particularly in cities like Thebes and Memphis, where high society placed a great emphasis on hygiene and appearance. However, cooling oils were widely used across all social classes, including labourers, traders and soldiers who needed relief from the relentless heat. Reflective metal mirrors to deflect sunlight. The Egyptian sun wasn't just hot, it was blinding. With little cloud cover and vast stretches of desert, the glare from the sun could be overwhelming, making it difficult to see and intensifying the heat. To combat this, Egyptians developed a simple but effective tool, highly polished bronze or copper mirrors that could reflect sunlight away from their faces, living spaces, and even work areas. Unlike modern glass mirrors, these were solid metal discs, often circular, with handles for easy use. Wealthier Egyptians even had gold-plated versions, which provided an even stronger reflective surface. By angling these mirrors correctly, they could redirect sunlight away from themselves and their surroundings, reducing exposure and making the heat more bearable. Egyptians also incorporated reflective surfaces in their architecture. Some homes and temples featured polished stone or metal plates positioned to bounce sunlight away from courtyards and shaded areas, keeping them cooler. While elites and priests had ornate mirrors, even common Egyptians used smaller, less polished versions for the same purpose. Workers building monuments in Heliopolis or Thebes often carried handheld mirrors to redirect sunlight while chiseling stone, preventing the glare from impairing their vision. This wasn't just a practical trick, it also had aesthetic and religious significance. Many tomb paintings depict goddesses and noble women holding mirrors, symbolizing beauty and protection. The goddess Hathor, associated with the sun and fertility, was often depicted with a sacred mirror, emphasizing its importance in daily life. Wearing kohl, ancient eyeliner, to reduce glare. When people think of ancient Egyptian beauty, kohl eyeliner is one of the first things that comes to mind. But kohl wasn't just a fashion statement, it was a practical tool for sun protection. Made from ground galena, lead sulfide or stibnite, kohl was applied around the eyes to create thick black or dark green line. This wasn't just for aesthetics, it significantly reduced glare from the sun, much like modern sunglasses. By absorbing sunlight and reducing reflection, kohl allowed Egyptians to see more clearly in bright daylight, especially in the open deserts and along the sunlit banks of the Nile. It wasn't just nobles or religious figures who wore kohl. Farmers, fishermen, and even soldiers applied it before working in the sun. Workers in Thebes and Saqqara, who built massive monuments under direct sunlight, relied on kohl to shield their eyes from the harsh glare of the limestone and sand. Even pharaohs and military leaders used kohl during battle and long journeys through the desert. Some historians believe it may have also improved visibility in sandstorms, making it an essential tool for those who travelled through Egypt's arid landscapes. Beyond reducing glare, kohl also had antibacterial properties, which helped prevent eye infections caused by dust and bacteria, a common issue in the Egyptian climate. This simple but effective trick shows that Egyptians weren't just focused on looking good, they were practical innovators, always finding new ways to adapt to their environment. Moist cloth and wet linen clothes. For Egyptians, linen wasn't just fabric, it was survival gear. Made from flax fibres, linen was light, breathable, and moisture-wicking, making it the perfect clothing material for the harsh desert climate. But the Egyptians didn't just wear it dry, they soaked it in water to enhance its cooling properties. The cooling power of wet linen wasn't limited to clothing. Egyptians also hung damp cloths over doorways and windows, using the same evaporative cooling technique to lower indoor temperatures. When hot air passed through the moist fabric, it became cooler, making homes far more bearable in extreme heat. By dampening their linen garments, Egyptians took advantage of evaporative cooling, a natural process where water absorbs body heat as it evaporates, lowering skin temperature. This trick was especially useful for workers in cities like Abydos and Luxor, where artisans and builders toiled for hours under the blazing sun. Labourers working on temples and monuments often soaked their linen before heading to work. Wrapping damp cloth around their heads and shoulders. This method was so effective that it has stood the test of time. Even today, survivalists and extreme heat workers use wet cloths to keep cool, proving that the Egyptians had already mastered a trick that modern science still recommends. Loose, layered clothing for air circulation. It might seem logical to wear as little clothing as possible in the Egyptian heat, but desert cultures knew better. Instead of exposing their skin to the sun, ancient Egyptians wore loose, flowing garments in multiple layers, which actually helped keep them cooler. The secret? Air circulation. When worn loosely, linen robes, tunics, and kilts created a barrier between the skin and the sun, trapping a thin layer of cool air. This prevented direct heat exposure, reducing sweat loss, and protecting against dehydration. Even in battle, Egyptian soldiers wore loose linen tunics instead of armour, prioritising heat resistance over heavy protection. This helped them maintain stamina in long desert campaigns. Women and priests also took advantage of layering techniques, often draping multiple thin linen sheets over their shoulders. This not only added aesthetic beauty, but also improved sun protection. Egyptians almost exclusively wore linen, made from the flax plant, because it was lightweight, highly breathable, and absorbed moisture well. In elite households, linen was often whitened with natural bleach, as lighter colours reflected sunlight better. Workers and farmers who couldn't afford fine linen still used simple, loosely woven cloth, which provided similar benefits. Slaves, labourers, and even pharaohs followed this same principle, keeping their garments airy to allow for maximum ventilation. Sleeping on rooftops for cooler night air. While the Egyptian sun was unbearable during the day, the desert climate brought cooler temperatures at night. Instead of sleeping in stuffy, heat-trapped rooms, many Egyptians took to their rooftops, where the open air provided natural relief from the lingering heat. Egyptian homes were often built with flat rooftops, making them perfect for sleeping under the stars. Families would lay out woven mats, cushions, or thin linen bedding, allowing them to enjoy the cool night breezes after a long, scorching day. This wasn't just something for the poor. Everyone from commoners to nobles made use of their rooftops in the summer. In the bigger cities, families gathered on their rooftops to escape the heat, trapped inside their mud brick homes. Wealthier Egyptians added low walls or partial coverings for privacy, while some even built small open-air sleeping areas with reed canopies for extra comfort. Sleeping on rooftops wasn't just about staying cool. It also helped avoid indoor pests like mosquitoes, which were more common inside warm, enclosed spaces. This tradition hasn't disappeared. Even today, in some parts of Egypt, Africa, and the Middle East, people still sleep on rooftops during the hottest months, relying on natural airflow instead of air conditioning. Open courtyards and wind tunnels in homes. Egyptians designed their homes to work with nature instead of against it. One of the most effective ways they did this was by incorporating open courtyards into their architecture. Unlike modern enclosed houses, many Egyptian homes, especially in cities like Thebes, Amarna, and Memphis, featured a central open-air courtyard surrounded by rooms. These courtyards allowed hot air to rise and escape, while shaded areas and plants provided natural cooling. During the hottest parts of the day, families often gathered in these shaded courtyards, where temperatures were noticeably lower than inside fully enclosed spaces. Egyptians also built wind tunnels into their homes, a technique that would later influence architecture across the Middle East. These tunnels, similar to Malkaf wind catchers, were positioned to funnel cool breezes into rooms while pushing hot air out through openings or vents. The concept of passive cooling in architecture, designing buildings to naturally stay cooler, started in civilizations like Egypt and is still used today in modern sustainable architecture. Some Egyptian temples and palaces had massive stone courtyards which absorbed heat during the day but released it at night, helping regulate temperatures. Even ordinary mud brick homes were designed with thick walls and small windows, minimizing heat buildup while maximizing airflow. High ceilings and tall windows for heat ventilation. Egyptians didn't just build their structures for beauty, they designed them for functionality, especially when it came to heat management. One of their most effective tricks? High ceilings and tall, narrow windows, which created a natural ventilation system that helped regulate indoor temperatures. This design was particularly common in temples, palaces, and large homes in cities like Thebes and Heliopolis, where temperatures could soar. Temples such as Karnak and Luxor were built with towering halls and clear estuary windows, which let in light while allowing hot air to escape. This architectural strategy worked on a simple principle: hot air rises. By constructing tall ceilings, Egyptians allowed warm air to accumulate at the top of rooms, keeping the lower spaces cooler for longer. Meanwhile, tall, strategically placed windows helped to release trapped heat, creating a steady cycle of air circulation. Even ordinary homes followed a similar pattern. Many wealthier residences featured high ceilings and rooftop openings, allowing for better airflow. In dense city areas, houses were built close together with shared walls, reducing sun exposure while maximising shade. The design of tall ceilings and high windows later influenced Persian, Roman and Islamic architecture, shaping the cooling techniques used in hot climates worldwide. Palm fibre and reed roofs. Shade was one of the most important ways to escape Egypt's intense summer heat, and ancient Egyptians knew exactly how to create it. Instead of sealing off buildings with heavy stone or thick roofing, they used palm fronds, reeds and woven fibre mats to construct lightweight roofs that provided shade while allowing air circulation. This technique was especially useful in markets, workshops and storage areas, where blocking out direct sunlight was essential, but trapping heat was not an option. In places like Memphis and Elephantine, market stalls were often covered with woven reed canopies, offering both shade and ventilation for traders and shoppers. The gaps between the materials allowed hot air to rise and escape, preventing the stifling heat buildup found in closed-off structures. Palm fibre and reed roofing weren't just effective, they were also cheap and widely available. Palm trees grew along the Nile in abundance, and their fronds could be harvested without damaging the tree. Similarly, reeds thrived in marshy areas, making them an easily renewable resource. Because these materials were so accessible and inexpensive, even the poorest labourers and merchants could use them. Wealthier Egyptians incorporated palm fibre shades in their courtyards, allowing them to regulate sunlight throughout the day. Unlike solid stone or mud brick, which trapped heat, these lightweight materials ensured that cool breezes weren't blocked. The open design allowed for natural airflow, making spaces noticeably cooler than fully enclosed structures. Shade screens made from woven mats. In a land where the sun was relentless, Egyptians needed a way to block out the heat while still allowing fresh air to circulate. Their solution? Woven reed and palm fibre screens, an early version of modern sunshades. These simple but effective barriers were crafted from thin, flexible reeds or palm leaves, woven together to create semi-transparent screens. They were used in homes, markets and public spaces, where they blocked direct sunlight while still letting the wind pass through. Unlike solid walls or heavy fabrics that trapped heat, these woven mats kept the air moving, creating a cooler and more comfortable environment. Markets in the bigger cities were often covered with long rows of woven mats, providing much-needed shade for both merchants and shoppers. Similarly, in homes, these screens were hung over doorways, windows and balconies, shielding indoor spaces from the scorching afternoon sun. Egyptians also adjusted their placement depending on the season. During the hottest months, thicker mats were used to create deeper shade, while in cooler months, they swapped them out for lighter, more breathable versions. Some wealthier Egyptians took this concept further by dampening the mats with water to increase the cooling effect. As the breeze passed through, it carried evaporated moisture into the room, creating an early version of air cooling. Cooling tunnels and subterranean passages. Egyptians understood that hot air rises and cool air sinks, so they designed cooling tunnels and underground passages to regulate temperatures inside their buildings. These early ventilation systems used a combination of natural airflow and shaded underground pathways to draw in cooler air while pushing out trapped heat. Some structures, particularly temples, palaces and granaries, had ventilated underground storage areas. These spaces were often connected by long, narrow tunnels that directed cooler air into the main building while allowing hot air to escape through rooftop openings. The result? A naturally cooler interior without the need for mechanical systems. Temples in cities like Abydos and Karnak had underground chambers that stayed cooler than surface-level rooms, preserving items used in rituals. In royal palaces, cooling tunnels were used to channel cool air from shaded courtyards into private chambers. Even some common homes and workshops incorporated semi-underground storage areas where perishable goods like grains, beer and oil were kept fresh longer. The concept of cooling tunnels influenced later architectural designs, including Persian wind towers and Middle Eastern underground cooling systems. These ancient engineering feats paved the way for modern air circulation methods still used today. By using Earth's natural cooling abilities, Egyptians created early ventilation systems that made their buildings far more comfortable. Underground, water storage and natural refrigeration. In a time before ice and electricity, Egyptians needed a way to store water and food without it spoiling in the extreme heat. Their solution? Underground storage pits and chambers, which use the natural insulation of the earth to keep supplies cool. These storage areas were often lined with reeds, straw or clay to prevent evaporation, and were sometimes partially submerged in damp soil to maintain a lower temperature. In cities like Memphis and Abydos, underground chambers were dug beneath homes, temples and markets, ensuring that cool drinking water and preserved food were available year-round. While wealthier Egyptians had dedicated underground storage areas in their homes, workers and farmers also relied on this trick. In rural villages, people would dig small, shaded pits near the Nile, covering them with moist reed mats to keep water cool for longer periods. Merchants in bustling trade hubs used a similar approach to store wine, beer and perishable goods, ensuring that their supplies remained fresh. Some even coated their clay storage jars with damp cloths, adding an extra layer of cooling through evaporation. Egyptians weren't alone in using underground storage to beat the heat. Similar cooling techniques were used in Persia, Mesopotamia and North Africa, proving that people across desert regions found innovative ways to refrigerate food without modern technology. By mastering natural refrigeration, ancient Egyptians ensured that both water and essential supplies stayed fresh despite the relentless sun. Shaded water features in gardens. For ancient Egyptians, water was more than just a necessity for drinking and farming. It was also a natural way to cool the air. The wealthiest Egyptians, particularly pharaohs, nobles and high priests, built shaded pools, fountains and basins in their homes and temples to lower surrounding temperatures. Some royal palaces and temple complexes had man-made pools known as sacred lakes, which were not only used for religious rituals but also served as natural cooling zones. Cities like Heliopolis and Karnak featured large temple courtyards with pools that provided both spiritual and environmental relief from the heat. These water features worked by absorbing heat from the air, a principle still used today in modern cooling systems. As the sun's rays hit the water, some of it evaporated, cooling the surrounding air and creating a more comfortable environment. This effect was amplified when combined with shaded courtyards or tree-lined gardens. While these shaded water features were a luxury in homes, they weren't reserved only for the elite. Some public spaces, including markets and large communal areas, had small shaded basins where travellers and merchants could cool off before continuing their journey. Even in bustling trade hubs like Alexandria, water basins were strategically placed near shaded pavilions, allowing people to escape the brutal midday heat. By placing water sources in strategic locations, Egyptians could naturally lower the temperature of entire buildings and courtyards. Even today, architects in desert climates use similar techniques, proving that Egyptians had mastered passive cooling thousands of years ago. Lotus flowers and herbal cooling remedies. The lotus flower wasn't just a symbol of rebirth and purity in ancient Egypt. It was also believed to have cooling properties that helped people combat the brutal desert heat. Egyptians would soak lotus flowers in water, allowing the essence to infuse, and then either drink it or apply it to their skin. Some even carried lotus-scented cloths that they would press against their faces or wrap around their necks for a cooling effect. Temples and palaces in cities like Thebes and Heliopolis were often decorated with lotus-filled pools and basins, where the water remained naturally cool throughout the day. Some noble and royal families took this a step further by adding lotus-infused oils to their cooling routines, combining fragrance with function. Egyptians weren't the only ones using plants for heat relief. They also adopted herbs like peppermint and aloe, both of which provided a natural cooling sensation. Peppermint-infused water was often used for washing, while aloe was applied to the skin to prevent heat-related rashes and soothe burns. For common people, the most accessible cooling remedy was simply crushing lotus petals into water and using the mixture throughout the day. Meanwhile, Egyptian priests and healers recorded herbal cooling recipes on papyrus scrolls, ensuring that future generations could use these same tricks. Drinking water. Before meals to stay cool. Staying cool wasn't just about what Egyptians wore or where they lived. It was also about how they hydrated. One key trick they followed was drinking water before meals, a practice that helped regulate body temperature and reduce excessive sweating. By consuming water before eating, the body was better prepared to digest food without overheating. This helped Egyptians stay cool for longer periods, especially in hot environments where excessive sweating could lead to dehydration. This trick wasn't just for the elite. It was a common practice across all social classes. Farmers working near the Nile in cities like Abydos and Fayum often started their day with water before eating, ensuring they remained hydrated before heading into the field. Soldiers preparing for long journeys through the desert followed a similar routine, using water as a preemptive defense against the sun's heat. Modern health experts still recommend drinking water before meals as a way to regulate digestion and prevent dehydration, proving that this ancient trick remains scientifically sound today. Egyptians were ahead of their time when it came to staying cool, using a mix of architectural ingenuity and simple lifestyle habits to survive the scorching summers. But their innovations didn't stop there. Underground homes and dugout dwellings. In a land where the sun could turn the ground into scorching stone, Egyptians had to find ways to escape the relentless heat. While many built homes with high ceilings and thick mud brick walls, some took it even further, underground. These dugout dwellings took advantage of the Earth's natural insulation, staying significantly cooler than surface-level homes. By digging into soft limestone or desert rock, Egyptians could create homes that remained at a stable, comfortable temperature even when the outside air reached extreme highs. Some structures were partially buried, with only entrances and ventilation shafts exposed, while others were built into hillsides or depressions to maximize shade. Though not as common as mud brick homes, underground dwellings were often used in work sites, border settlements and military outposts, where protection from the heat was crucial. Labourers working on royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings sometimes dug their own underground shelters nearby, using the same excavation techniques they used for tomb building. In the far reaches of Egypt, near oases and mining sites, these dwellings helped workers escape both the sun and sandstorm, which could be just as unbearable as the heat. This cooling trick was mostly used by workers, soldiers, and desert travellers who needed temporary shelter from the sun. However, in some regions, semi-underground homes became permanent settlements, particularly in areas where limestone cliffs or natural rock formations made digging easier. Even today, this ancient cooling method is still in use. The troglodyte homes of Matmata, Tunisia, are a perfect example. Modern-day structures built using the same principles that Egyptians relied on thousands of years ago. Thick mud brick walls and whitewashed exteriors. In ancient Egypt, most buildings were made from mud brick, a mixture of mud on straw and water that was moulded into bricks and left to dry in the sun. While this might seem like a fragile material, mud brick had one major advantage. It was an excellent insulator. During the day, the thick walls absorbed heat slowly, preventing the interior from overheating. At night, as temperatures dropped, the stored heat was gradually released, keeping rooms relatively cool without any modern technology. To enhance this effect, Egyptians whitewashed their buildings using lime plaster, creating a reflective surface that bounced sunlight away instead of absorbing it. This technique significantly lowered indoor temperatures, especially in major cities like Memphis and Thebes, where homes, temples, and administrative buildings relied on these materials to provide relief from the desert heat. Mud brick wasn't just used for homes. It was also the primary building material for palaces, fortresses, and even some temple walls. While grand structures like the Great Pyramid were built from limestone, many everyday Egyptian buildings were entirely mud brick. In workers' villages, like the one found at Deir el Medina, houses were clustered together for additional cooling, with narrow streets that provided shade throughout the day. Wealthier Egyptians also built shaded courtyards surrounded by high mud brick walls, creating a cooler microclimate within their homes. Mud brick was used by all classes, from the poorest farmers to the wealthiest nobles. Even pharaohs lived in mud brick palaces, although these structures were often more elaborate, featuring large columns and painted walls. The only major downside, unlike stone, mud brick eroded over time, which is why most of these ancient structures no longer exist today. Wind catchers, malkaf. Long before electric fans or air conditioning, the Egyptians mastered the art of passive cooling using a system called the malkaf, or wind catcher. This was a tower-like structure built on rooftops that caught cool breezes and funneled them into homes, temples and palaces. Meanwhile, hot air was pushed out through openings or vents, creating a continuous airflow that naturally cooled the space. The effectiveness of this system depended on placement. Wind catchers were usually positioned to face the prevailing wind. In cities like Luxor and Abydos, where temperatures could soar, these towers provided a steady supply of fresh air, making indoor life far more comfortable. While Egypt is famous for wind catchers, this technique wasn't exclusive to them. Persians and Mesopotamians also used similar systems, and even today, parts of the Middle East still incorporate wind catchers into traditional architecture. Some of the largest Egyptian temples featured hidden ventilation shafts that worked on the same principle, allowing breezes to enter while keeping the sun's heat out. Wealthy Egyptians even combined wind catchers with water basins, where breezes passing over the water created an even stronger cooling effect. Wind catchers were most commonly found in noble and elite homes, but their concept was widely understood and adapted to different buildings. Royal palaces used them extensively, as did larger administrative buildings and storehouses. Even some tombs, where priests performed rituals, were designed with natural ventilation systems to keep them from becoming unbearably hot. Egyptians didn't just accept the heat, they engineered ways to stay cool, using materials, design, and nature itself. And when it came to personal cooling, their clothing choices played a big role.